There's more than 34 people dying in Vancouver City alone. We saw photos of seas on fire and a rupture in an undersea gas pipeline in the Gulf of Mexico, sending flames to the surface of the sea. An explosion in the Caspian Sea, sending an enormous column of flames shooting up into the skies. And closer to home, we've seen flooding in Winchester and Bishop's Waltham. These freak weather events becoming more and more frequent. I mean, the latest flooding in Winchester happened only yesterday. In August, the latest IPCC report was published, and its results were shocking. Human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. Scientists are also observing change across the whole of Earth's climate system, in the atmosphere, in the oceans, ice flows, and on land. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the working group's report was nothing less than a code red for humanity. He said the alarm bells are deafening and the evidence is irrefutable. He noted that the internationally agreed threshold of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels of global heating was perilously close. He said we were at imminent risk of hitting 1.5 degrees in the near term. The only way to prevent exceeding this threshold is by urgently stepping up our efforts and pursuing the most ambitious path. We must act decisively now to keep 1.5 alive. So, what can we do here in Winchester District? Sometimes, when the magnitude of a problem is so enormous, it can feel easier to bury your head in the sand and pretend it's not happening. This is not a problem that one person can solve on their own. We all have to work together to have any chance at all. When we wrote our carbon neutrality action plan back in 2019, we recognised this. We knew our target of the whole district becoming carbon neutral by 2030 was ambitious and could be met only by all of us working and acting collectively. Many individuals, businesses, groups and networks are already taking positive steps to reduce their carbon and improve sustainability. This is fantastic, and it's important we recognise their efforts, share what's happening and harness their efforts too. As outlined in the action plan, we believe that a public open forum is one way we can help bring together all those people working on and interested in achieving this ambition. And we're finding that community groups and the public are asking for more and more opportunities to talk about this in public. Cabinet therefore decided to establish this dedicated carbon neutrality open forum to provide a platform to discuss climate change. We recognise that not everyone is on the same stage of the journey, so we welcome the chance to help people along that road with us. Now, the purpose of these carbon neutrality open fora will be to enable open discussion and the exchange of ideas between the council, the public, partners and other interested parties, with a particular focus on understanding what needs to be done to achieve a carbon neutral Winchester district by 2030. And the goals of the forum are threefold. First is to raise awareness of climate action across the district, so that people are aware of where action is taking place and who's leading it. To provide guidance about how people can get involved. Winchester City Council plays a key role as a leader and influencer within the district, and through the open forum, we can share knowledge and expertise with each other. We want to stimulate collective action against climate change. We want to encourage and enable people across the district to be involved in climate action in order to bring us closer to our 2030 carbon neutrality target. So how will these sessions work? We hope to have these fora 2 or 3 times a year, at least twice anyway. This first session will be run over Microsoft Teams, as you're all here, you know that. But one of the questions later will be, do we want to continue doing it on Teams, or people prefer doing it in person? Each session will focus on a specific climate-related theme, i.e. transport, energy generation and usage, buildings, infrastructure. And again, there will be a chance for you to sort of say what you'd like future themes to be. This first one will be more of an introduction, so there's no theme as such. Each forum will have a panel of experts and representatives, and they'll be assembled depending on the theme on discussion. With each open forum, there'll be a series of presentations from the panelists on the chosen topic area. And following the presentations, we'll open up to a question time, Q&A section, where you can ask questions of the panelists. So for this first session, as I say, there's no specific theme as such, so you can ask whatever you like as the panelists. You'll be able to meet them all and familiarise yourselves with the format. Each of our panellists will be delivering a presentation about climate action across the district. And again, we will have the Q&A today as well. So it's got some housekeeping rules for you. As I said before, please keep yourselves on mute. If you're not talking, and please wait to be asked to talk before you do talk. We're having the Q&A session at the end, but if any questions come to mind, please do put them in the chat just when you think of them. This meeting is being recorded, so I hope you're all okay with that. Please be polite and courteous at all times and don't interrupt other speakers. We will mention it for the Q&A session later, but if you'd like to ask your question in person, then please just raise your hand virtually in the chat. But if you're happy for it just to be read by someone else, then write it out in the chat, and then we can group sort of similar questions together. Now it's time to meet the panellists. So our first panellist member is Sue Robbins, and she's from Winchester City Council, and she's been with us for 3 years as Head of Economy and Community, with responsibility for a wide portfolio for services, including sustainability, community, health and economy. Key areas of her work are the delivery of the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan and the development of the Green Economic Development Strategy. Other local authority roles have included working on White Hill and Borden Ecotown regeneration and with various councils across the southeast. So Sue, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. Am I to start with my presentation now? Thank you very much. And this is very much, as Councillor Murphy set out, an introduction, and it's a scene setting on 2 of the key policy plans that we have in place, and also a little plug at the end, if I may, on our Green Future Fund, which is an enabler. So I'm going to share my screen, so bear with me just one moment. I'll do that. Has it come up?
Yes, it has.
Okay, so is it in full screen mode?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. So yes, as I say, 2 key documents I'd like to do a very quick overview of. I've only got about 10-15 minutes, so I will not be able to do them justice in that time, but they are available online so that you can look at them in greater detail at your leisure. So if I start, I wanted to just give you a flavour of the annual review that we undertook on the Winchester District Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. As mentioned, this has been running now for 15 months or so, and so we thought it was important to undertake a review and look at the circumstances we've been facing over that period, particularly the COVID-19 pandemic impacts, but also recognising what we have been able to achieve and the projects that we have been able to deliver in that time. New data has become available, and I will touch on that, but I know that the next speaker will also cover that in more detail, so I won't dwell on that too much. And the review looked at how we're resourcing our plan and our delivery, and it's not only our own expenditure, but actually what we've been able to secure through bidding for external funds to enable us to support project delivery. And it covered our campaigns, our collaborations, and importantly, how we monitor and govern over this wide-reaching programme. So just to touch on, please excuse me, just to touch on some of the things that we have been able to achieve. As I say, the plan does go into a lot more detail about these, but we have installed EV charging points. I think we're about 30 or 37 points. We've had solar panels on the new Winchester Sport and Leisure Park. We've secured funding from BEIS to enable energy efficiency works in homes with the lowest energy ratings and experiencing fuel poverty. The council moved to a green energy tariff in April, and we launched our biodiversity action plan. And I think importantly, on another policy area, we undertook the consultation on the local plan, strategic aims and issues, and really placed the climate emergency and sustainability at the heart of that consultation. So as I mentioned, we have had new data come in on the council's performance, and if you were to look at the comparable measures between 2018 and the 2019, we have reduced by some 11% our emissions. However, we have had additional activities come into scope. For example, we've had new developments come online, and also we've started to include employee commuting. So in fact, our emissions are now at just about 4,300 tonnes of CO2. And significantly, the emissions come from the electricity and gas consumption. And for these, nearly half of that commercial energy comes from Riverside Leisure Park, which you know is currently closed. And we will have to assess this year the impact of that closure and the new leisure park, sport and leisure park coming on. And over a third of the domestic energy comes from our communal area in Chesil Lodge. So again, we will be looking at measures to address that and how we can bring those down. And as with others that has been recognised, transport still remains a high emitter, and much of that for us comes from our depot contract lorries. So we are going in the right direction, but we significantly still need to increase our reductions over the next 4 or 5 years if we are to meet our own targets of being carbon neutral by 2024. And so we set out within the plan some new priorities to achieve a 20% reduction, focusing on those areas of transport, looking to work with Hampshire County Council on its plans and its policies and how we can best input into those for our benefit, and also looking to how we can ensure our employee commuting remains at reduced levels. Clearly, with the working from home over the COVID period, we saw that drop, and we want to see how we can keep that at those low levels. Energy, as I mentioned, we will be looking to look at measures within the Guildhall and the West Wing. And as mentioned, for the domestic side, we'll be looking at Chesil Lodge. And importantly, we mustn't forget that we also need to look at developing viable business cases for investing in energy generation on our own land. And a new policy that we would look to set is around our mitigation and offsetting policy. This is not that we feel that this is something that we want to use at the outset, but it's important to understand what our policy on that is for the council. So then new data was also issued by BEIS for the district. I won't dwell on this because I know other speakers will cover this, but just to say that it is clearly all sectors of the district must substantially reduce its carbon emissions if we are to reach the 2030 targets. And we understand that this is a big challenge, with transport accounting for nearly 60% of emissions and heating homes and commercial energy consumption about nearly a quarter each. So we do recognise that there is some key work to do on the district as well. And so we again have highlighted priorities to achieve a 10% reduction on emissions, looking at how we might pilot emission-based car parking charges, supporting expansion of zero emission delivery services. So this is the idea of the last mile being by electric bike or electric van, etc. And working with the county as well to look at local walking, cycling and walking plans for the district. We must work with our largest businesses to look at measures and help them reduce their energy use. And we would also like to investigate circular economy initiatives that uses waste as resources. We have a large investment programme for retrofitting our housing stock, and we must implement that.
Sorry, Sue, you're muted now.
Sorry, is that better? Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Thank you. Sorry, it was just getting some feedback, so sorry about that. So I've just to add that we must still deliver our actions on the biodiversity action plan. We do recognise that this is a, hold on the slides. That's coming right good. We do recognise that, as I say, this is a big challenge, and so we want to provide some additional capacity to our teams on 3 areas of work, which is the sustainable transport, so that we have the ability to develop proposals, look at getting projects ready to bid for government funding if programmes become available, and so that we can work with and liaise with key agencies. Campaigns and communications, we want to help promote more widely all that's going on across the district. So this isn't just about campaigns and promotions for ourselves, but this is about creating a sense of movement and energy about all that's going across the district and all our partners. And we want to bring in some expertise to help us create a roadmap of quantified and timed interventions to meet that district target, so that we have a proper roadmap of what's needed to be done over the next few years. And to help us in that, we have 2 key policy documents, which is the local plan review, and we will continue to work closely with our planning colleagues to ensure that climate emergency is built into their development standards and locations and policies, and the Green Economic Development Strategy as well. And that's my second policy document that I would like to very quickly cover, keeping an eye on the time. So our previous economic development strategy came to an end this year. So it was, 2020, sorry. So it was really important that we create a new strategy to set the forward direction for the district's economy. But we recognised that clearly there's been so many significant impacts that has really changed the economic environment and landscape, if you like. So we really needed something that was new, forward-looking, ambitious, but really helped us set the roadmap for the district meeting its carbon neutrality target. So we are calling it a next generation strategy, where we are moving away from the idea of traditional economic-based work that might look at picking a particular sector, a high knowledge sector, and backing that, bidding for specific investments, and moving much more to a scenario and contingency-based planning, looking at broader indicators such as well-being, sustainability, and resilience, and really creating a balance between knowledge sectors, but also our foundation sectors, which are construction and retail and social care, etc. So we are positioning this much more to reflect the changed world, and also still the uncertain world that we're in with regards to knowing how some of these changes post-Brexit and post-pandemic will actually play out. It does focus heavily on green growth, and this is really to reflect that what we call the green dividend will generate new capital, new natural capital and well-being, improved health, etc. But that can also bring economic benefits with regards to GVA and jobs. And we know that the low carbon and environmental goods and services sector is significant for the UK economy. And if the district just followed national growth trends over the life of the strategy, we could be looking at over 2,000 jobs and 300 million in sales brought into the district. So the way that we've looked at this more flexible, more scenario-based strategy is to consider 4 scenarios: a levelled up district, 20-minute communities, a resilient district, and a vibrant place to do business. But what does that actually mean? Well, for the levelled up, this is about inclusive growth, so that, as I say, we balance that knowledge and our foundation economies, that we make sure every part of the district and every community in the district benefits from growth, and that there is affordable housing, housing is improved for affordability and sustainability. The resilient district is around flood protection, adaptation, enhancing local biodiversity, but also looking at renewable energy generation. The 20-minute communities, I'm sure this is something people have heard about, and this is where we can reduce the need for travel by having services, facilities, and everything everybody needs within 20 minutes of their communities. bringing together a much better work-life balance, and which will start to address congestion. And for a vibrant place to do business, this is thinking around the changing in our high streets, what's the future retail space use, flexible and affordable startup space in the right locations. And for us, particularly with our strengths, can we be a centre for sustainable tourism? And we need to invest in district-wide cultural infrastructure. So they're the scenarios through which we can then plan and prioritise and develop actions. And to help guide that, we have 6 themes. I won't read them out there, you can read them, but what we need to do against these themes is consider what is the most important of the scenarios we want to develop actions under, and then for each of these come up with a set of interventions, projects, investments, etc. And this is where we will need to work with our stakeholders, our businesses and our communities to devise those interventions. Like the carbon programme, we can't do this entirely on our own. We need to work with partners. We need to do this collaboratively. Clearly, we have a leadership role and we can influence, but we very much want to work with others to help us deliver this strategy. And so for us, the key next piece of work will be to develop up that action plan and to monitor the action plan and the Green Economic Development Strategy. We have 8 outcomes that we will develop KPIs against, and that we will make sure that we monitor and track our progress against those. And so we want to build Winchester's reputation as a dynamic, sustainable district with a compelling, instinctive blend of assets, capabilities and development opportunities. And I've got about 30 seconds left to do my plug for the Greener Future Fund. And this is actually something where people can come to us for some grant assistance. So through our crowdfunder platform, we are match funding projects 50% up to a maximum of 2,000 for green measures, be that on transport, energy, behaviour change. So if you've got a project and you'd like some money to put towards it, please go to our crowdfunding platform and we can help you. So I think that's my 15 minutes. It's a real gallop through some key documents, but we have the panel for questions and they are available if people want to look at them in more detail. So thank you. That is my presentation. I'm just going to stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Our next panel member is Chris Holloway. So Chris has been leading Winchester Action on Climate Change for 10 of the last 12 years, first as their paid director and now as their chair. Before that, she had various jobs, mostly liaising between communities and local government, including senior roles at Eastleigh Borough Council, Surrey County Council and in London. She has an allotment, an electric bicycle and a cat. Over to you, Chris. Oh, you're muted and we can't hear you.
I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I was apologising for the fact that my computer has just crashed because it can't bear Microsoft Teams, the result of which is that I have no slides to show, but it doesn't matter because they were only going to be pretty pictures. They weren't going to be full of words. So it makes really very little difference, apart from the fact that one of them was a very exciting slide. So can I just check with Alex, did you manage to open the document? And if so, are you going to be able to show the graph?
Hi, Chris. Yeah, I haven't got them open. I have them email from you, so I can load this up now if you need.
Fantastic. And then I can chat, and when I get to the graph, you can show me the graph. It's about slide 2 or 3, I think. Thank you.
Okay, let me know when.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Sorry about the mechanical problems. There's no doubt at all that we're facing an emergency, and as all the things that Linda's just said, the emergency is fast approaching being a crisis instead. And I think the thing that is the most difficult is actually deciding to get on and do something, because I think we're all caught in the fact that there is so much to do and it is so urgent, and everybody's got an idea saying we should do this or we should do that, that you end up running from idea to idea to idea, going round and round in circles, thinking we must work out exactly what the savings are all going to be and we must work out this. And you end up writing documents which say we need a plan, and then you have a document 6 months later that says we need a plan, and a document 12 months later that says, well, we're sort of well on the way to having a plan. And I feel very sympathetic to anybody caught like that, because we all feel rather like rabbit in the headlights. But actually, what I'm going to be saying this evening is what we've actually got to do is to, and this is a terrible way of putting it, we have to stop planning and start acting. We have to do something and do the right thing. Just a bit of background. I'm the chair of Winchester Action on Climate Change, and we were set up 12 years ago as Winchester Action on Climate Change, WINAC. But I'm thinking that we should now be calling ourselves Winchester Action on the Climate Crisis. Fits the initials just as well, and it reflects the truth. We're a voluntary group. We're funded entirely by voluntary donations and by charitable grants and a very occasional contracts to do things for people like the council. We have a really small staff team, but a lot of very active and experienced and knowledgeable volunteers who do things. We aim to work collaboratively with the city council, the county council, local business, local communities. We do see our role as speaking the truth about the state and the crisis that we're in, but we don't see our role as being beating people up or moaning at them, because we're all in this together. We've got to work together on taking things forward. I was asked to talk about both what we've been finding out about emissions and also what I think the most important things to do are. And I think in order to decide what the most important things to do are, we have to actually just focus on two very simple questions. The first one being, which changes will make the biggest impact on cutting our emissions and reducing runaway climate change? And the second one is, who can make those changes happen? So the first question, what's going to have the biggest effect? Alex, this is the moment to show the graph. Every year, Bob Whitmarsh, one of our members, who I can see sitting in the screen, hello Bob, for the last 10 years has been doing a detailed report looking at the government statistics about emissions in Winchester District. Now, they're always a bit out of date because it takes a while for the government to collect the statistics and analyse them and put them up on their website. They do them nationally, and what Bob does, and this year he's done it with another colleague, Robin, is to produce the map for Winchester. This is, I think, the most important of everything that's in the report that they're just bringing to an end now. They've got the figures and they're doing the polishing and making sure the full stops are in the right place. The blue line at the top shows emissions in Winchester District over the last 15 years. Well, to be absolutely precise, 13 years. And as you can see, the blobs, the round circles being the reality and the dotted line being the graph, as you can see, it's been very steadily going down. Very encouraging. However, and that's why this is so important, almost all of that reduction is nothing to do with anything happening in Winchester. That reduction has happened because the government decided not to burn coal to create electricity. And that in itself has brought our emissions down locally, a government activity. The orange blobs in the second rung are emissions in Winchester District not including emissions from electricity that comes out of our sockets. And as you can see, they did go down a bit for the first 5 years, but they've been bubbling along at pretty much the same level ever since. There's a slight downwards dip in 2019, which is the latest figures we've got. We're not absolutely sure whether that's just a blip and it'll go back up again, or whether it's actually a reality, which would be nice. But there's really been very, very little reduction from anything we've been doing here in Winchester. As you can see, 2020 is where the squares and the circles stop, and after that, there's a dotted line. And the dotted line is what we need to do to get to zero emissions by 2030. And you can see what an enormous shift there is, especially along the orange line, which is what we can actually do locally. Okay, if you'd like to stop sharing at that point, I might ask you to share again. Then later on, there's one more slide that I wanted to show you. But when we look at the emissions that happen in Winchester District, there are, actually, yes, please, can you show me the next slide, the one that says what's going to make the biggest impact on the climate? So of the things that we can do, it basically falls into 4 categories. Keep going on to the next one, and the next one. Here we are, thank you, that's the one. What changes are going to make the biggest impact on the climate? Reducing emissions from transport. 58% of the emissions in Winchester District come from transport. Now, obviously, there's a lot of different things in that. It includes, for example, getting our food to the local shop. So some of it is inevitable, although one hopes that it could be done by bicycle, or one hopes it could be done by electric bike, at least some of it. But an awful lot of it is us all driving our cars. The next biggest chunk is emissions from buildings, mostly used to heat, although these days also sometimes used for air conditioning to cool. Homes, offices, shops, businesses, all ambient buildings. And they're the 2 big lumps that we can see from the government's emissions statistics. The other 2 things that are really important for us to do don't appear in the government statistics in exactly the same documents, because they're not about actual emissions at the moment, but they are, I think, we believe in Winnock, probably the other 2 important things for us to think about. One of them is taking our money out of fossil fuels and ideally putting it in green business instead. And the final one is increasing renewable energy. So my second question, we can just leave those up if you like, and while I go through talking about how we might actually do that. The second question I said was, what are the changes that will make the biggest impact? These, who can actually make these changes happen? And this is the point at which I think it gets very complicated, because when I talk to councillors, and particularly Linda, they say absolutely right. They say, we can't do it ourselves. Our own carbon footprint is about 0.5% of the entire carbon footprint of the district. We need other people to do things. We need the government to do things like changing the electricity supply, not burning coal anymore. We need members of the public to do things. On the other hand, when you talk to local residents, they say quite reasonably, I can't do it all myself. You talk about reducing emissions from transport. How can I leave the car at home when I've got to get myself to work, the kids to school, and there isn't a bus? And there's no pavement, and I don't feel safe on bikes. And anyway, it's too far. And obviously you talk to business and they say, well, we'd love to do something, but it's a bit difficult because it might mean raising our prices, and we're not quite sure if our consumers want. and you talk to politicians nationally and locally, and they say, well, there is also the problem that it would be very nice to do all these things, but supposing it meant we didn't get voted back in, we'd be even worse off than if we hadn't done quite so much. And so everybody is busy saying, well, it's not really quite me who has to do something, it's somebody else. And obviously what my role at WINAC is to say, it's everybody's business. We all have to do something. So run through these things one at a time. How do we reduce emissions from transport? Well, first of all, the county council, who is responsible for what was called a transport authority, the county council has to put its money where its mouth is. It says walking, cycling and buses take priority over cars and roads. But if you look at what they spend, that's not what happens. They're supposed to be developing a local transport plan that will tell us all exactly how they're going to do it, but we haven't seen much of it. The government has told them to produce a plan for buses, which has to be in by the end of October after public consultation. But I haven't seen anything consulting people about what sort of bus service we want. The government is saying they want more regular buses on more routes and electric buses where possible. We don't know what the county council is going to say. But it's not only the county council who needs to do some things. The city council could do a lot more. If the city council were to charge more for parking diesel cars than electric cars, that would be good. If the city council was to charge much more for parking on the street, residents like me pay a fee for having cars parked on the street, which is tiny compared with the fees in other places like in London, where I used to live. They get in lots more money that they could then spend on other things. There are all sorts of things that the city council can do, but it also needs all of us to do something. And the most important thing we need to do is to convince the city councillors that if they take action to help us get out of the car, then we will get out of the car and we will vote them back in again. There is no point us grumbling about the council not doing something on their carbon footprint, and at the same time grumbling about them charging for parking and grumbling about them closing roads. We can't have our cake and eat it. There is no way we are going to cut emissions in Winchester if we don't do something about transport. Moving on very quickly, and because my time is very nearly up, reducing emissions from buildings, that's something where, as far as homes are concerned, actually it has to start with us, because most homes in Winchester are owned by individual householders and individual families. And so to make those homes more energy efficient, individual people have to decide that they're going to do it. Now, it would be brilliant if there was more subsidy. It would be brilliant if the government could give people incentives like funding to help pay for better insulation. It would even be great if the government did something like saying, like at the moment, you can't rent a house out if it doesn't reach a minimum level of energy efficiency. They could even have a law that says you can't sell a house if it doesn't reach a minimum level of energy efficiency. So it would be great if the government helped, but it won't work unless we individually, one at a time, decide, well, at least I can do my house because it belongs to me. The council's already doing a lot on council housing, and it would be great. I mean, it would be great if they had more money to do more, but they're doing a lot, and which is really good, I think. We need to do the same ourselves. And WINAC's got a scheme. If you Google super homes, Winchester super homes, you'll find a scheme that we've got for helping you work out what to do. Taking money out of fossil fuels, for ages and ages, I kept thinking this was a matter of lobbying my bank, and it took a very long while before the penny dropped. And I thought, well, actually, I've got this pension money sitting in a pension. I wonder where my pension fund is investing it. I sort of somehow had this ludicrous idea that they put it in the bank. I didn't realise they bought stocks and shares with it. So even if you haven't got any savings that you can invest in a windmill, you could at the very least talk to your pension fund and say, where are you putting my money? And if by any chance you're in Hampshire pension fund, if you are a local government employee or belong to a local group, we have a campaign to try to get the county council's committee that looks after the Hampshire pension fund, which is all our local government pensions, to get them to take their money out of fossil fuels. Winchester City Council's already said it's going to take its saving out of fossil fuels, so that's good. It would be great if they could also put their voice to ours and help influence the county council's pension fund about where that money goes. And finally, renewable energy. Would you be able, Alex, to show the last diagram that's a chart, that's a picture? Keep going, keep going, keep going. This one. Oh no, go back. No, one further back.
Sorry, I think it's just loading at the moment.
Okay.
Is that up on the screen now?
No, at the moment I can just see lots of renewable panels. You've gone too far forward. That's it. There it is. Stop.
Brilliant.
Thank you. The reason that I'm saying it's the other really, really important thing to do is to get more renewable energy being created in Winchester is shown by this graph. The very bottom little green square is the amount of green electricity generated in Winchester district. Last time we had the statistics, I think they're a couple of years old now. 2018 they are. The next blob up is the amount of green electricity that's used in Winchester that comes out of the grid. And as you can see, that's over 3 times as much. So we already only produce a third of what we should. The next shows how much green electricity we need if we're going to replace everything that's currently done for all the electricity that's produced in other ways. If we're going to replace it all with green electricity, we need an enormous amount more. And so it's vitally important, very roughly, 16 times as much renewable energy is needed in Winchester district than we're producing at the moment. We must produce more renewable energy. And again, that depends on us. Anyway, I've gone on for long enough. Thank you all very much indeed for listening. And do join us because you can get your voice heard as the politicians. Please don't just think you've got to do things yourself, though you do. Remember, you've also got to support your politicians to do things because they can't do things if they don't think you're going to vote for them. Whatever party they are, this is not a party political broadcast. Tell politicians of every party you want them to take action. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. Now, last but certainly not least, we have Matt Jane from University of Winchester. Matt's Head of Environment and Building Services there. He's responsible for the environmental team, waste, energy, travel and transport, and the maintenance of the estate. So he's a very busy person. Matt has been running the university carbon management programme since 2006 and is currently project managing the installation of a £3.5 million carbon reduction project, which he will tell us about in a bit more detail, hopefully. Over to you, Matt.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes,
Brilliant.
we can.
Excellent. Right, I'm going to try and share my screen and not break everything. Can you all see the presentation okay? Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Right. Okay. So following on from the other speakers tonight, I'm very much going to take a bit more of an organisational view on carbon. And one of the things I've been asked to come along and talk about tonight is our carbon journey that the university has been on for the last 15 years or so. Just to tell, for those of you who don't know anything about the University of Winchester, we do have a university in Winchester. The university likes to see itself as the University for Sustainability and Social Justice. We are one of the oldest universities in the country, founded in 1862. We're quite small as universities go. We're about 8,500 students, full-time equivalent, about 900 staff, and we have about 1,800 students living in our accommodation, consuming vast quantities of my energy. I think it's fair to say we're quite a rapidly growing institution as well. So since we started our carbon management plan, the estate size has increased by 79%, which is a huge challenge when you're trying to reduce your carbon footprint. In terms of the estate this year, we've obviously opened quite a obvious building up on the Romsey Road. That's our new West Down Centre. That was a 10% increase in the size of the estate. And I'll talk about what impact that building has had on our carbon footprint shortly. So I think we covered my role. I have quite a wide-ranging role within the university, and as Linda said, I've been running our carbon management programme since the very outset. And there's a few other bits and pieces that I do within the university, but I won't talk about that in too much detail. So we have had a carbon management plan in place since 2006. We have set ourselves a net zero target by 2030. But we also have a kind of aspiration to get there a little bit earlier if we can. And we've kind of set that aspirational target at 2025, which is a massive challenge. You know, we're a huge consumer of stuff, in particular energy. We currently use around £1.8 million a year of utilities. So we're a big consumer, probably similar size in terms of a carbon footprint to the council. You know, we generate a bit of our own electricity. Around 2% of our total electricity demand comes from on-site generation, which is nowhere near enough, and we need to do a lot more, which again I'll talk about in a little while. We source 100% of our electricity is sourced on the renewable energy tariffs, and we've been doing that since 2008. And for me personally, that is a really important thing that a large organisation like ourselves should be doing. We also have, since the start of the last academic year, bought 100% of our gas from renewable sources as well. It's actually bought from biomethane producers who obviously generate biogas using anaerobic digestion. So we're kind of heading towards net zero from our scope 1 and 2 emissions, but obviously a lot more to do. And we've probably spent somewhere in the region of £2 million over the last 10 to 15 years on carbon reduction specific projects. But I will say that it is now part of what we do as an organisation. So, you know, energy efficiency, carbon reduction is very key to all of the projects that we run as an estates department. And as Linda said, we've got quite an exciting decarbonisation project underway. We just received a government grant for £3.1 million to decarbonise our heat sources. So I'll talk about that in a bit more detail as well. So just for those of you, and I'm assuming there are probably a few energy and carbon nerds in the room, a little bit like me, but quite often I get kind of drawn into talking about, you know, using lots of these kind of terms. So I thought it'd be worthwhile just running through what I'm talking about before I delve into it. So just talking about some of the terminology around carbon. So we have our various different scopes of a carbon footprint. So scope 1 is our direct emissions, and they're specifically from burning fossil fuels and loss of refrigerant gases. So that's fossil fuels used to heat our buildings and fossil fuels used within our vehicles. And then, of course, we also have refrigerant gases. We don't have a huge amount at the university, but any gases that escape from air conditioning systems have a huge impact in terms of their carbon footprint. We then have our scope 2 emissions, which are indirect emissions from electricity consumption. Obviously, electricity itself doesn't have carbon, but where it's generated, obviously does generate emissions. And I will say that the grid electricity supply, as Chris highlighted earlier, has been dropping significantly over the last couple of years. And then finally, we have our kind of scope 3 emissions, and these are other indirect emissions, and they are the ones that are very, very difficult to calculate. So we have always, from kind of day zero in our carbon management plan, calculated our emissions associated with water consumption, water waste, the physical waste generation that we generate on campus, and construction projects and all that kind of thing, and of course our business travel as well. So that's air and land-based travel, and also our grey fleet usage. So for those of you unaware, grey fleet is staff personal vehicles used for business purposes. So we have lots of really good high quality data for that, and we've been measuring that from the very outset, but there are still some elements of scope 3 that we're not currently measuring. So one of those being staff and student travel. We are starting to get better quality data from our travel surveys to enable us to calculate the emissions from that. And then the real kind of difficult one is all of the other stuff that we buy as an organisation. So be it pens and notebooks to furniture, or capital goods like new buildings, for example. So all of those have a carbon impact. We also measure our emissions and report our emissions in 2 ways. So we use, and this is based upon the Greenhouse Gas Protocol for emissions reporting. So we have location-based reporting, which essentially looks at our energy emissions and uses the grid factors to calculate our carbon footprint. We also, because we obviously buy renewable energy at quite a significant cost, want to show that there is some benefit to buying renewable energy. So we use what's also called the market-based reporting methodology. So that's based upon the specific factors for our electricity and gas. So what have we done to date? Loads of different stuff going on around the campus. We've replaced our boiler plants. We've gone from oil to gas, upgraded old gas boilers, but now the focus is very much on moving away from gas entirely and switching to electricity. Obviously insulating buildings and pipe work, various different other energy efficiency measures like pumps and motors and variable speed drives, all the kind of stuff I get very excited about. Lots of other people may not. Making sure that we're managing our energy in an efficient manner as well. So we have what's called a building management system that controls all of the buildings on our campus. All of the lighting now pretty much is now converted to LED, and we're installing lighting controls to make sure it's only on when it's needed. Improving ventilation, installing air heat recovery, removal of air conditioning systems. As I said, big impact potentially on emissions if we have any leaks of refrigerant gases. One of the other things that's been very key for our program is actually understanding where we're using energy within the organisation. So we've installed 800 sub-meters across our entire campus for gas, water and electricity, which means that we can identify areas where we're wasting energy and using it, and putting plans in place to reduce that energy consumption. So after we've done all these energy efficiency works, now's the time to start looking at renewables. And that for me is quite key, that you can stick solar panels on a building that's not particularly efficient. What's the point? Try and reduce its energy efficient, make it more energy efficient before putting renewables on. And as I said, we are looking at the current projects. We're putting in some air source heat pump installations, and the photographs on the right hand side are some of the first air source heat pumps that have been installed in the last couple of weeks, which I'll talk about in a minute, and some new solar panel installations on our student village. So in terms of our carbon emissions overall, in terms of our location-based emissions, so that's the emissions associated with the grid factor for energy, we've actually reduced our emissions by 40% despite growth of 70%, which is pretty good going. And relative to the size of the estate, that's about a 66% reduction in CO2 emissions from energy per metre square. So as we grow, we're becoming more efficient, buildings are becoming more efficient, and we're putting more energy efficiency measures. Our relative carbon footprint is reducing. The new building up at West Downs is a 10% increase in the size of the estate, but emissions this year only increased by 4%, which is pretty good going. Obviously, we've had some challenges around COVID, lots more ventilation, lots of windows open, so all the heat we're generating is being dumped outside, and we're still working on that building and getting it commissioned properly. In terms of the market-based emissions, so taking into account the fact that we buy 100% renewable on gas and electric, actually overall it's a 99% reduction. We do have a little bit of tweaking to do with the gas emission factors, just to make sure that that is accurate. So the 2020 data is still very much draft. We're still working on it, but it kind of gives you an idea of where we're kind of heading. And then obviously the carbon impact between buying renewable or buying non-renewable energy supplies. The yellow line is if we assume that we're buying gas from the grid and electricity, and the purple line is the impact of buying on those renewable tariffs. And as you can see, been some huge reductions. There is still a tiny little bit there in 2020, which is last academic year, which is our Scope 1 emissions, which is still our vehicle fuels, which we're doing a bit of work on as well. And then, so we're currently running a large-scale decarbonisation project. So this is a public sector decarbonisation scheme, and this was a funded project from Bees, which is very much focused on the decarbonisation of heat. And for us, an additional benefit is improving air quality by not spewing gas boiler emissions out into the atmosphere. So we want to be doing our bit to improve air quality within the district. So this was a £1 billion fund. The university was really lucky in receiving a £3.12 million grant, and with that money we're going to be installing 34 air source heat pumps over 11 of our largest buildings. We're going to be putting about 150 kilowatts of PV on, which is about a 200% increase on what we're currently generating, so probably going to be somewhere in the region of 6% of our total demand. Obviously there's a load more we need to do there. We're putting more building management systems in and optimizing all of the kit that's already installed and making sure that's running as efficiently as it possibly can, and some more LED lighting upgrades. So this project's going to guarantee us financial savings of £70,000 a year and carbon savings using those grid factors of about 480 tonnes of CO2 as well. So the last kind of remaining bit of Scope 1 comes from our vehicle fuel consumption. We've kind of set ourselves a target to switch all of our fleet to electric vehicles by 2025. Currently about 35 vehicles, 16 of them are electric. I've got 4 more on order, which I'm very excited about. And the priority for us at the moment is replacing those diesel vehicles with electric due to air quality issues within the district rather than the carbon side of things. And you don't need to be a climate scientist to work out. The graph here just shows the amount of vehicle fuel we purchase versus the line is the number of electric vehicles in the fleet. As I said, you don't need to be a climate scientist to work out. You buy more electric vehicles, you use less vehicle fuel. But we have a massive challenge in terms of our Scope 3 emissions. We thought we were doing really good stuff. We've, massively reduced our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. Some would arguably say to almost zero. But the Scope 3 footprint is absolutely huge. So we've just done our first kind of full Scope 3 carbon footprint, and it's added 22,000 tonnes of CO2 to our total carbon footprint. So I will say there's probably a few data issues that we need to resolve. Good quality data is important, particularly when trying to reduce your carbon. And to get to that net zero target that we've kind of set ourselves by 2030, but hopefully by 2025, we're going to need a really robust strategy to kind of avoid emissions in the first place, reduce the emissions that we can't avoid, and then offset. I don't like the term offset, but deal with those emissions via carbon capture and storage, retiring carbon credits from the markets, and sequestration, which I said right for the first time in a long time. So we have, as a university, joined the Environment Association of Universities and Colleges, the Carbon Coalition pilot, and essentially this is a consortium of universities within higher education that are kind of joined together to work on the methodology to improve calculations of Scope 3 emissions, and then to buy good quality offsets, if you like, for dealing with those Scope 3 emissions. So as part of that initial joining of that initial year of the Carbon Coalition, we've actually purchased 386 tonnes of CO2, and that was to offset the Scope 1 vehicle fuels and the elements of Scope 3 that we were 100% sure that we're happy with. So You could say we are net zero for our calculated scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions at the moment. Obviously, we've got a bit more work to do with the wider scope 3. 22,000 tonnes is quite a big cost for an organisation to swallow. We've actually split that this year, 50% UK Forest Carbon Code and 50% in the portfolio that the Carbon Coalition has kind of agreed are, and it's a peer-reviewed process for ensuring that all of those offsets are kind of verifiable, additional, and they're good quality offsets. So yeah, quite a bit of cost that we need to consider in the. There we go. So just in terms of our future plans, we obviously want to deliver this decarbonisation project by March 2022. I did have hair before this project started, but it's quite a tight deadline, but hopefully we're going to get there. Obviously, we've got those investments we need to make in those in our EV fleet to make that 2025 targets, and we've definitely got some challenges in terms of switching to that EV fleet. You know, some of the bigger vehicles, minibuses, large vans and things like that are particularly difficult when switching to EV. And I will say, actually, one of the important things, of course, if you're switching to on an EV strategy, is that you'll have to buy your electricity from renewable sources. As I said, we're working on that methodology for improving our scope 3 emissions and reporting accuracy. We're now starting to really consider the embodied carbon within our built environment and our estates master plan, looking at the routes of going down refurbishment versus new build. That's a really interesting conversation, and you could probably have a whole topic on that. And then, of course, there has been the COVID, so there's a huge number of challenges and potential opportunities as we kind of emerge from COVID. Obviously, some challenges in terms of ventilating buildings and heating lots of buildings with windows open. And of course, that's going to have a massive carbon impact. But, you know, there are new ways of working and those opportunities from, you know, people working remotely, not having to travel for business reasons. That's going to have a huge impact in terms of our kind of scope 3 emissions moving forwards. So that is it from me. I hope that was useful. I'm just going to try and unshare.
That was great, Matt. Thank you very much.
No problem at all.
Right, we're going to start our question and answer session in a couple of minutes. So ready, quite a lot of you put some questions in the chat. I think at this stage it's highly unlikely we'll get to answer all of them this evening, but we will put answers to everything up on our website. So there will be answers to everything asked. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Alex for the polling.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Hi, everyone. My name's Alex, and I'm the Sustainability Officer at Winchester City Council. And for the next couple of minutes, just before the Q&A, we're going to conduct some live polling to capture what topics are most important to all of you, and also what topics that you think would be invaluable to discuss at future open forum meetings coming up over the next couple of months. So for the live polling, we're going to be using a platform called Slido, which is super easy to use. If you haven't used it before, you don't need to download anything on your computer or sign up for an account. All you have to do to join is click on the link, which I've just posted in the chat now, or you can also follow the instructions that I'm just going to share on the screen now. So on the screen, you can join by scanning the QR code, or you can also type in manually at slido.com #open_forum, and that will take you to the polling page. I had this up at the beginning of the session for some of the people who's got to the session early. So if you've already clicked on the link and got yourself on the polling page, then that's fantastic. And sit tight while we wait for a few more people to join. So I'll just give a minute or so for people to just join and log in through the page. And I'll be able to see people as they start joining into the meeting. So once we've got a good number of people, I'll start launching the poll. If you're having any difficulties and you can't get into the poll, then don't worry, you can follow along by using the chat function. So answer it as if you're in the poll, and we can gather them as well. Just give it a couple more seconds for everyone to join in. So it's going to be quite a short poll. We're going to be asking 3 short questions just to really help shape the format and the focus of the carbon neutrality open forums moving forward. So So I think a couple of people are in now. So I'll launch the first question. So the first question we have is, what climate-related topics would you like to discuss at future open forum meetings? So this is an open-ended question, so feel free to type in whatever topics you like in this one. And on your screen, you should have a box which prompts you to enter a word. So you can enter your words in here, and you can put as many as you like in while the poll is open. It does, though, limit you to 25 characters. So if you have like a sentence you want to put in, try and limit it to just a single word, or a couple of words to describe that topic you want to focus on. And as answers are coming in now, we've already had a few. They'll start populating on the screen like this into a word cloud. So some of the themes that are coming out top here, we can see transport is the biggest one. We've had a couple of people who voted transport. It's currently got 7 votes. Couple of others that have been put down. We got circular economy, heat pumps, community energy, recycling is another one. Cycling's now got 2 votes. There's a lot of votes around transport for this one. And we currently got 15 people who have answered the poll. So I'll just give it a couple, maybe a minute or so, just for some more answers to come in. Community energy, that's got 3 votes now. Also seen offsetting pop up. Cycle lanes got 2 votes. Waste has popped up as well with 2 votes. So I think looking at this, the ones that have come up with the most votes so far are transport, community energy, and cycling as the really big ones. So I'll just give it 10 more seconds to answer this question before we go on to the next one. Okay, that's fantastic. So I'm going to lock voting on this one, and now I'm going to move on to the next question. So for the next question, rather than a word cloud, an open-ended question, this one is going to ask you to rank the following categories in order of preference to discuss at future open forum meetings. So on the screen, you're going to be presented with 11 different categories of climate action. These are planning and land use, transport, buildings, housing and infrastructure, commercial and industrial, energy generation and heating, natural environment and biodiversity, agriculture and food, waste, community engagement, education and youth, and then lastly, carbon offsetting and sequestration. So what I want you to do on your phones is just to try and rank these from 1 to 11, 1 being your favorite topic, one that you'd really like to discuss in a future open forum, and then 11 being the least that you'd like to discuss in a future open forum. So I've just seen 2 people have answered already. In terms of how to do this, when you scroll over the answers on your poll, there will be a number next to it. The first one that you click will be your one that you assign as your first, and then second will be the second preference, and then so on until you get to number 11. And once you've ranked all 11, you can then press submit and it will come through on the screen here. So you have 7 people so far have put in their answers. And first, again, just like the previous question, transport's come up right on top there. Energy generation and heating is currently second. Buildings, housing and infrastructure third. Waste at 4th. Keep the answers coming. I'll give it another minute before we go on to the final question. Energy and generation and heating has leapfrogged transport to number 1. I'm just looking towards the bottom here. Commercial and industrial is 8, community engagement 9, education and youth is 10, carbon offsetting and sequestration at the bottom. I'll just do 20 more seconds. Just give it a time for some people to get their last points in. think at the moment, energy generation and heating, transport and buildings, housing, infrastructure are the top three. Brilliant. Thanks for voting on that one. So I'll lock the voting for this one and then go on to the last question, which is just a really simple multiple choice question, which is how would you like future open forums to be hosted? So there's two parts to this question, really. The first one, what format would you like the session to be in? So would you like it to be virtual, in person, or hybrid of the two? And also, what time would you like it? So have you got a preference over morning, afternoon, or evening? And with this question, you can select multiple options. So if there's multiple times and dates and formats that suit you, then please, by all means, select all of those that apply. And we'll just give just over a minute to get some more answers in. Virtual evening is coming out on top at the moment. So that's exactly like the one we're running today. So that's nice that we've started off with a format that's coming out quite popular. And we'll do another 30 seconds. I think 15 people have voted so far. I think every single option's got a vote so far. Most popular virtual evening, then we've got hybrid evening and in-person evening. So I think all three options at the moment are evening options. And we'll just do another 10 seconds in case there's any last people who want to contribute to this one. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you everyone for taking part in that poll. So the results from these are going to give us really a good indication of what topics you want to discuss for these future open forum meetings. And you may remember as well, over August and early September, we launched an online survey that went out through our citizen space pages with similar questions to that. So thanks all who are in this meeting who have also answered that survey. We'll use the results from that and this to really give us an indication about what we'd like to discuss in future open forum meetings. So that was a nice speedy run through the poll. I'll pass you on to Councillor Murphy now for the Q&A.
Thanks, Alex. And thanks everybody for filling in those polls. Right, so we're going to start with the Q&A now. I apologise, but we are overrunning slightly. But as I say, everybody will get their question answered. I'm going to, rather than go through them in order, I'm going to sort of pick and choose so that all panelists get a question and we don't take all questions from the same person, if you see what I mean. So the first question is from James Miller. So it's quite an interesting question. And he says, given the limited remit of the City Council, is the 2030 district target actually a distraction, as it is largely beyond your control? Wouldn't specific targets on matters within your control be more realistic and also more achievable? So I'm going to take that one. I think it is an interesting question, but I don't think it's a distraction. Actually, I think it's the opposite. I think the 2030 target focuses the mind. And in some ways, if we hadn't set the 2030 target, we wouldn't all be here now. We sort of set our target of 2024 for the City Council because we thought we had to get our own affairs in order first. And it would also mean that we could help the rest of the district by sharing what we learnt. And it's been actually really good for starting discussions with companies, with other organisations, because I mean there have been several I've been to and said, oh, have you ever thought about going carbon neutral? And they go, oh, I don't know when. I said, oh, well, our target for the district is 2030. And they go, well, actually, that's a good date. So we'll make it 2032. 2030 as well, even. I noticed that Matt, you know, the university's got target 2030, which is brilliant, even though I think he will get there before. So, you know, I think it is something that it helps people think about it. And, you know, we may not achieve it, but I think if we had a target of 2050, we might all be thinking, oh, we'll start thinking about it in 10 years' time. So, you know, I disagree with that one. I think it focuses the mind, and I'm glad that we sort of set an ambitious target, and you know, I'm happy that we stick with that. Right, so the next question is for Chris. I think it's a sort of technical one. Do those emission stats include imported emissions, are emissions expended by Winchester district inhabitants and businesses through all their activities? If not, how can we get a handle on the full picture?
A very good question. Had I had like an hour rather than 10 to 15 minutes, I would have tried to explain how complicated it is measuring emissions, because what the government produces is the things that the government can easily measure, like how much gas and how much electricity is used by different sorts of consumers. So they can tell us that very straightforwardly because they have meters that know whether it's businesses or homes. Try and work out how much emissions are caused by the food we eat when some of it's grown in our allotments and some of it's imported by aeroplane from Kenya, and some of it's grown in greenhouses which are heated but then transported here in a lorry. It just gets to a complete nightmare. There are all sorts of estimates for all sorts of things. The statistics that I was showing you are the statistics that are in WINAC's emissions report, which are the government statistics. What I can do and send to the council to send to you all is some links to 3 different sets of analyses that show different combinations of how you can add up the statistics. I wish it was easy to get a handle on. Unfortunately, it's a nightmare. However, I can see Bob Whitmarsh has got his hand up. If it wasn't cheeky, he's actually our expert on this. I'm just the person that's presenting. So he might have something cleverer to reply than me.
That would be great. Could you give us a few words, please, Bob?
Yeah, not really. I had my hand up for another reason. I wanted to ask a question, but no, what Chris has said is basically true. Roughly what we've worked out in the past is that the emissions of the district from BEIS data, i.e. government data, are roughly probably half the total emissions of the district, taking account of things like food and consumption and imports and so on. That's a very rough figure, but it gives you an idea of the sort of the task ahead, if you like.
Great, thank you. I've got a question from Charlotte Bailey. I think this is for Sue. Industry and business is half of the district's emissions. How are we liaising with them so they play their part too? And there's almost a second part to this one that I saw. Do we have any vision as to whether Winchester might be able to achieve real advantage over the next 10 years by leading the way in climate solutions, innovation, attracting green businesses, etc.?
Yeah, thank you. Good questions. And we do liaise with our businesses, and we are partners to and support the Sustainable Business Network, for example, which shares best practice and encourages initiatives and schemes and access to information, etc. But we also are supporting a couple of our businesses with projects such as Marwell, and we want to work with more businesses, particularly our larger ones. So we will be looking to invest in direct engagement with them, go and meet with them, talk with them. We have applied for some funding that will enable us to carry out audits with them. So yes, we want to work with those businesses, but we recognise that we need to build up that programme, and that's why it's a priority in this year's Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. We've identified that's important. I think with regard to what's our vision for the future and how can we capitalise on this in the next 10 years, the Green Economic Strategy is our tool for doing that. There is a green dividend to be had. There is an opportunity to build up our skills around this, not only in innovation, but also in repair and installation and construction. There's many skills and trades that needed to address this. And so the Green Economic Strategy will look to give us that tool to do it. And as I mentioned, within that, we were looking at some of our key sectors. Tourism, really big for our economy. Could we be a leading sustainable tourism area? So yes, we do have a vision, and we will be working with our businesses to help deliver that. And I think that's why the Green Economic Strategy is such an important aspect of this carbon neutrality programme. I hope that answers the question, but I can provide more on that if need be. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, there's a question from Matt. Could the university work with residential communities in the areas around its campus to provide effective heat pump solutions, e.g. sink boreholes, etc.?
Yeah, so obviously our focus at the moment is on decarbonising our own gas supply. There are definitely a lot of complications around community energy projects, I would say, and whether ground source heat pump would be a suitable solution for our campus. It's not something we've identified in terms of our low carbon kind of program so far, but it's certainly something that if it was a viable scheme, it would definitely be something the university would be interested in.
Great, thanks. Bob, you've got your hand up to ask a question.
Yes, I have. Sorry. Well, first of all, was a comment. I don't know if you're aware, but the Department of Transport estimate the average commute by car is 2,700 miles a year. So some of the council staff could avoid their commute and work at home. There's some pretty low-hanging fruit there, perhaps. But my question was more about display energy certificates for public buildings, and I'm not quite sure who to ask the question to. Maybe one of you can answer it. First of all, I've discovered, writing the annual report for the City Council in the last few months, the display energy certificates, for a start, are not always up to date. For the larger buildings, they should be updated annually. But the other thing is many public buildings have very poor energy ratings when you work out the kilowatt hours per square metre per year, which is the metric that Matt was mentioning earlier. So my question really is, who's in charge of enforcing the inspections of public buildings and improving the standards of the energy used per floor area?
I see a volunteer willing to take this.
Do you want me to take that one? Yeah, so obviously the majority of our buildings have a display energy certificate. So for those of you who don't know, a display energy certificate is basically like an EPC when you buy a house. So an EPC is based upon the theoretical energy consumption of the building. A display energy certificate is based upon the actual energy consumption of the building. So any building over 250 square meters to 500 from memory needs a display energy certificate every 10 years. Any building from 500 upwards requires one annually. So we have been putting display energy certificates on all of our buildings annually, and we do it by academic year. So my understanding is, Bob, that absolutely nobody is particularly interested, if I'm completely honest, in display energy certificates. There's very little enforcement. We do it, and I would say that maybe the metrics on which they're based are not great, but it does set a line in the sand, so you can monitor your building moving forwards and gradually see that building energy performance increase. But yeah, sad to say, you and I are probably the only people that look at them as we walk in the doors of a public building, you know. I mean, I've certainly never had anyone from the Environment Agency come around and look at enforcing display energy certificates, unfortunately. But they are very much a public display of poor carbon performance. And I think if more people ask questions about them, it would certainly be different.
Thank you. Right, we've got a question now from Anna Wise. Would Winchester City Council consider developing a district carbon offsetting scheme whereby companies and organisations could contribute instead of purchasing carbon credits, which could fund green energy? Sue?
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned in my presentation that we this year will be looking at what our mitigation and offsetting policy should be. There are lots of opportunities, there's lots of options. Do you invest locally? Do you invest nationally? What sort of schemes might you want to buy into, and how do you work these? So I think for us, we need to look at all of those different options and work through with the members and with our communities about which would be the best approach. So we do recognise it's important, and that that will certainly be in the mix of options to consider. But I do take your point that, you know, it will keep that initiative and keep the money, and it will keep the activity local. So, but to be decided and worked through this year.
Great, thank you. Now we've got time for one more question. So I'm going to throw this one to Chris. Do Winchester residents feel that Winchester is a low carbon place to live? and how can we make them feel this?
I think that's a very interesting question, because I'm not entirely sure what it means. Do we want people to feel that Winchester is already a low carbon place and therefore they don't need to do anything else? That doesn't feel like a good idea, but I don't expect it's what the questioner asked. Or is it that we want them to feel that they want it to be a low carbon place to live? In which case I would say definitely. One of the things that there's plenty of experience about what is it that makes people change how they behave, and in particular in this case try to live in a way that creates fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And the most effective way of all is if they believe that that's what everybody else does, because people like to do what they think everybody does. And so yes, what we need is everybody to think that to live in Winchester means that you really have to be committed to living a low carbon life, because then everybody will encourage everybody else and it will make a big difference.
Thank you. And so at 8 o'clock, I think that wraps it up nicely. I'd like to thank all our panelists very much for their time this evening. I'd like to ask everybody for turning up and for all your questions. As I've said, they will be answered on our website in the next couple of weeks. So I won't promise a time. And thank you to all the sort of staff and officers who've made this possible this evening. You've all been wonderful. So thanks very much, everybody, and hope you all enjoy the rest of Green Week and all the wonderful things that are going on in it. So thanks, everybody.